Settle in and let your breathing slow like a line of quiet footsteps on old wooden floors. You are stepping into a small town clinic in the 1950s where the air smells faintly of floor wax, paper forms, and clean cotton. Everything here is designed to feel ordinary because ordinary is how fear gets smaller. Tonight, with the Sleepless Scientist keeping watch, you will drift through clipboards and careful handwriting, cold glass vials resting in ice, and the soft, practical choreography of nurses who do not waste motion. You will notice how a single needle can be almost boring and still change the future. And when the lights dim, you will follow the quiet science that keeps working even after you fall asleep. You take one more step inside, and the building answers with a familiar squeak. Not mystery, just linoleum doing what linoleum does. You think you are walking into a dramatic medical event, the kind that deserves trumpets. Wrong. You are walking into a system that survives by being dull. The first thing you notice is the line, because of course there is a line. It is not frantic. It is the kind of line you find at a bakery, except everyone is pretending not to be afraid. A volunteer points you toward a table with forms and a pencil that has been chewed flat. Public health is often built with the cheapest wood and the most patient handwriting. You look for the science, expecting gleaming machines and bright lights. Instead, you find clipboards, index cards, and a nurse with shoes that do not squeak. She is checking names like she is reading grocery items, and that is the point. If she makes it feel routine, your nervous system stops making speeches. This is not a hospital drama. This is logistics wearing a white uniform. The room has signs, simple and large, the kind you can read while holding a child on your hip. Arrows. Step 1, registration. Step 2, vaccination. Step 3, waiting chairs. Fear hates clear signage because fear loves confusion. A man in a short-sleeved shirt jokes too loudly about needles. You hear the laugh, and you also hear the thin edge under it. In a town like this, everyone knows someone who knew someone. A child who did not walk right afterward. A cousin who went to a big city hospital and came back quiet. A summer that turned suspicious, where swimming pools became rumor factories. So the clinic makes everything predictable. Predictable is how you keep a crowd calm without saying the word calm. A nurse asks your name, and you give it. She asks your address, and you give that too. She asks if you have had a fever, and you say no because you are here to be ordinary. She does not look you in the eyes for long, not because she is cold, but because she is working. Efficiency is its own kindness when 100 people are waiting. On the table are stacks of paper and a stamp pad that smells like ink and rubber. There is no computer to remember you, so the paper must do it faithfully, without electricity, without complaints. Each form is a tiny promise that someone will keep track. That is how a vaccination campaign becomes real, one pen stroke at a time. You shuffle forward, and your shoes whisper against the floor. In a corner, someone has set a fan near an open window. It rattles softly, the way a tired machine says, "I am still here." The air is warm from bodies, but it carries a clean edge. Soap, alcohol wipes, cotton. The sense of small, controlled battles. You watch the nurse's hands, because hands tell the truth. They move in a practiced loop. Form, glance, stamp, set aside, Her fingernails are short. Her sleeves are rolled just enough. Nothing dangles, nothing catches, nothing slows her down. You think the hero of the story will be the vaccine itself. It will, eventually. But tonight, the hero is routine. Routine is how you move a whole town through a doorway and nobody gets trampled. A child is held close, cheek pressed into a mother's shoulder. The child's hair smells faintly of shampoo. And outdoors, the mother murmurs something that sounds like a lullaby, except it is instructions. Hold still. Look at me. Almost done. The nurse nods, approving the mother's calm performance. Because the clinic is not only vaccinating bodies, it is vaccinating moods. The goal is to make the moment feel smaller than the fear that brought everyone here. And outside this building, the fear is not imaginary. Polio is a virus that can be a ghost in your mouth and throat, and then, without warning, an arsonist in your spinal cord. Most infections are mild or even unnoticed. That is part of the cruelty. It can hide inside normal days. Then, in a small fraction of people, it reaches the nervous system and starts breaking the wires. Muscles weaken, reflexes fade. Breathing can become a mechanical problem. In the worst cases, you do not die dramatically. You simply cannot do the next breath. So inside this clinic, the staff makes a different kind of atmosphere. Not fear, not heroics, just the plain feeling of a checklist being completed. And once you are inside this quiet order, you start noticing the unseen thing the whole night depends on: keeping a vaccine cold. Your eyes drift, almost by accident, toward the insulated containers near the back. They sit like picnic coolers, the kind used for lemonade at a church social. That is the joke of biology. World-changing medicine often arrives in a box that could also hold sandwiches. A lid lifts and you see it. Glass vials, small and clear, nestled into ice-like treasure that hates heat. There is a sheen of condensation, tiny beads of water forming and sliding. Cold makes its own weather. Someone, somewhere, has written a date in neat ink on masking tape, batch numbers, expiration, a little cluster of symbols that stands between safety and waste. You might think the cold is just for comfort. It is not. It is chemistry wearing a winter coat. Vaccines are delicate in the way living things are delicate. Even when they are inactivated, even when they are not capable of infection, their proteins and structures can still unfold. Heat can warp them, slowly, quietly, like leaving a record too close to a radiator. And once warped, they may not teach your immune system the right lesson. So the clinic treats cold like a precious ingredient, not as an afterthought, but as a rule. Ice packs are replaced on schedule. Thermometers are checked like they are pulse readings. Hands move with a careful kind of impatience because the clock is always ticking. This is what later generations will call the cold chain. A boring phrase and a terrifying responsibility. It means that from the place the vaccine is made, to the truck, to the local storage, to this table, the temperature must stay in a safe range. It is a relay race where the baton is a fragile molecule, and dropping it does not make a loud sound. It just makes the vaccine quietly weaker. The best disasters are the ones you do not notice until months later. So the staff builds habits that make invisible problems less likely. They keep the cooler in the shade, They open it only when they need to. They count vials and then count again. They keep a log because memory is unreliable when you are tired. Even the ice has a schedule. Someone's job tonight is basically to babysit frozen water. Congratulations! You have discovered that modern medicine runs on chores. A nurse lifts a vial, and for a moment, it looks like nothing. Clear liquid, a simple label, a rubber stopper. It could be eye drops. It could be perfume. But you know and she knows that inside that glass is a rehearsal for your immune system, a controlled introduction. The goal is to show your body a mask of the enemy without letting the enemy do what it does best. In the 1950s, the polio vaccine that most people think of first is the Salk vaccine. It uses inactivated virus, killed in the blunt biological sense, meaning it cannot replicate. It cannot turn your cells into virus factories. It can only be recognized, only studied, only filed away by the immune system like a mugshot. That is why temperature matters. If the viral particles degrade, the mugshot blurs. Your immune system is smart, but it is not psychic. It needs a clear picture. A volunteer holds a clipboard and checks off deliveries, and you can almost hear the mental arithmetic. How many doses? How many people? How many hours? How much ice? Public health is often the art of not running out without wasting. There is a quiet respect in the way they handle the bottles. No tossing, no casual shaking, just a gentle lift, like carrying a sleeping kitten. The bottles clink softly against each other, a sound like tiny bells underwater. And you realize something uncomfortable. This whole operation depends on people doing small tasks correctly, over and over, while being human, while being bored, while being distracted, while thinking about dinner. That is why the clinic feels so procedural. Procedure is how you protect good intentions from human error. A nurse checks a vial label, then checks it again, not because she doubts herself, because she respects how easy it is to be wrong. The cold chain is basically a bedtime ritual for medicine. Repeatable, quiet, reliable. You do not ask it to be exciting, you ask it to work. Your turn in line arrives, and the nurse gestures toward a small station, a chair, a metal tray, a jar of cotton balls, a bottle of alcohol that smells like sharp honesty. The cold boxes remain behind her, guarded by routine. And when the temperature is right and the paperwork is done, attention drifts to the simplest tool in the room, an unassuming syringe. The syringe sits there like a plain utensil. Not elegant, not dramatic, just functional, like a spoon. In the 1950s, depending on the clinic, you might see glass syringes that can be sterilized and reused, thick, clear barrels, metal needles that look slightly too serious. Sterilization is not a vibe, it is a process. Heat, steam, time, or chemical disinfectants, depending on resources. Some clinics will have autoclaves, essentially pressure cookers for killing microbes. Others will rely on boiling and careful handling. In any case, the philosophy is the same. Do not give someone a vaccine and a new infection as a souvenir. You watch the nurse's hands again. Hands are the real instruments here. She checks the syringe the way a mechanic checks a tool. No cracks, no cloudiness. Plunger moves smoothly, needle secure. Then she draws the dose from the vial with a practiced pull. The liquid rises, clear and calm, with a meniscus that catches the light. A tiny bubble forms, then is tapped away with a small flick. That flick is a whole education. Air bubbles are not usually dangerous in a muscle shot, but the habit is sacred. Habits are how you keep 100 tiny steps from turning into a big mistake. You hear the paper wrapper of something opened, a soft tear, then silence. The room is full of these small sounds. Cotton being pinched, a cap being removed, a pencil scratching, a chair leg shifting. The soundtrack of prevention is not inspiring. It is domestic. A nurse speaks to you in the tone reserved for weather reports. Relax your arm. Look away if you like. Breathe normally. No sermon. No performance. Just the steady voice of someone who has done this all day. Alcohol touches your skin, cold and sharp. The smell blooms instantly, like a clean warning. It is not gentle. Exactly. It is efficient. Alcohol disrupts membranes, denatures proteins, and makes many microbes regret their life choices. In human terms, it is a reset button for the surface of your skin. It does not sterilize the entire world. It just makes the immediate area less crowded with bacteria that would love an invitation inward. Then there is that brief pause. The pause is always the longest part. Your muscles want to tense because your body is an ancient animal. Ancient animals do not enjoy punctures, but the nurse's calm is contagious. She steadies your arm with one hand, and with the other, she aligns the needle. The needle is not angry. It is not cruel. It is simply a piece of metal that has been sharpened to obey physics. And then it is done. A quick pressure, a small sting, like a firm pinch from reality. You feel the push of fluid, just a moment of fullness in the muscle. Then the needle is gone again, leaving behind only a dot and a story your immune system will soon read. Cotton presses down, a bandage appears, beige and ordinary, as if to say, nothing important happened here, but something did. You exhale, and you notice how much you were holding in. The nurse nods once, already moving on to the next person. No applause, no certificate, just a quiet, practical act. And in that quiet, you realize the bravery here is small and repeated. It is a child holding still. It is a parent not letting their own fear spill over. It is a nurse doing the same careful motion for the 200th time without getting sloppy. It is a volunteer keeping the line orderly even when someone cuts in. Civilization is often just that. Repeated decency under fluorescent lights. You might imagine the clinic workers as fearless. They are not. They are simply trained and tired and determined to be normal anyway. They know that vaccines are not magic shields. They know that no intervention is perfect. But they also know what polio can take, so they keep going, one arm at a time. A child asks if it will hurt. The nurse says, just a pinch. Not a lie, not the whole truth. The whole truth is that life hurts sometimes, and we still choose the option that hurts less later. In the corner, a metal tray catches the light. Used cotton goes into one place. Used needles go into a container that does not forgive mistakes. Even the trash is organized because germs do not care about your intentions. There is a quiet order to the disposal, like returning tools to a box. The clinic is a machine made of people, and each person is a gear trying not to slip. And when the moment is over, the story does not end at the bandage. It continues inside you, where the real work happens quietly. Inside your arm, the immune system is already doing its endless paperwork. You do not feel it in any poetic way. You might feel a soreness later, a dull ache, like your muscle is complaining about being disturbed. But the real action is microscopic and deeply uninterested in your awareness. The vaccine, inactivated poliovirus particles, is now a kind of message in a bottle. Your immune cells patrol the tissue like bored security guards. Some of them, called antigen-presenting cells, are professional nosy neighbors. They pick up pieces of the vaccine, break them down, and display fragments on their surfaces. This is how the immune system says, "Look what I found." It is not elegant. The immune system does not do romance. It does filing. A fragment of virus protein gets pinned up like a wanted poster. The cell that found it travels to the nearest lymph node, because that is where the meetings happen. You do not feel your lymph nodes working unless they swell and get sore. Most nights, they just sit there like quiet offices, lit from within. Inside that node, you are surrounded by cells that have one job: to recognize patterns. T cells drift past like inspectors with clipboards. B cells wait like anxious librarians, each one holding a single specific question. Do I match this shape? Do I recognize this intruder? Most of them do not. They keep drifting, patient and unglamorous. Then, one B cell binds to the fragment on display, and it finally stops wandering. Congratulations, you have been selected for overtime. That B cell pulls the fragment in, chews it up, and shows pieces back on its surface. It is asking for help in a language made of receptors and contact points. A helper T cell, if it has been trained to recognize the same threat, leans in close. The helper T cell delivers chemical encouragement, little signals that mean, yes, this matters. Now the B cell starts dividing. 1 becomes 2, 2 become 4. It is not dramatic, it is arithmetic. Soon there is a small crowd of identical B cells, all tuned to the same shape. Some of them turn into plasma cells, factories that secrete antibodies. Antibodies are proteins shaped like tiny slingshots, designed to stick to a target. They drift into your blood and lymph like confetti you never asked for. The goal is simple. If the real poliovirus ever arrives, these antibodies can bind it quickly. They can block it from entering cells. They can mark it for destruction. They can make the infection smaller, faster, less likely to reach nerves. And then, as the weeks pass, your immune system does the most important quiet thing. It keeps a few of those cells alive for later. Memory B cells, memory T cells, long-lived witnesses. They do not fight every day. They wait. They are the reason a vaccine can matter years later when you are no longer thinking about this chair. You might assume memory is perfect. It is not. Immune memory fades depending on the pathogen and the vaccine. Sometimes it needs a reminder, a booster, like rereading a page you do not want to forget. Polio vaccines, depending on type and schedule, are built around that reality. Biology is never one and done. It is always maintenance. Here is the subtle part, the part nobody in line is saying out loud. There is more than one polio vaccine story in the 1950s. The Salk vaccine, inactivated, injected into muscle, is the careful, conservative lesson. The Sabin vaccine, live attenuated, taken by mouth, is the louder class. Attenuated means weakened, trained to stumble, not sprint. The live vaccine can replicate in the gut, which is where poliovirus naturally likes to begin. That can create strong mucosal immunity, the kind that helps stop transmission. It can also, very rarely, mutate back toward danger because evolution never sleeps. So you end up with a public health choice that feels like a human choice. Do you want the safer personal option or the stronger community shield? Different countries, different eras, and different risk tolerances answered differently. In this clinic, tonight, the process is quiet and the science stays mostly behind the curtain. The nurse does not explain B cells. She explains where to put your card, because in the end, protection depends on follow-through as much as molecules. And speaking of follow-through, the clinic's calm depends on forms, stamps, and simple record-keeping that quietly holds the whole project together. You are handed a small card that feels too thin to carry so much meaning. It has lines for dates, dose numbers, and a signature that proves a real human did this. The ink is slightly smeared because life is not a laboratory. A volunteer points to the next table where another person is writing carefully. You watch the handwriting like it is an art form, because it almost is. Neat handwriting is a technology, just not the kind that plugs in. The ledger on the table is heavy, bound like a church book. Pages are ruled, names stacked in orderly columns. This is how a town becomes legible to itself. Without these marks, the campaign dissolves into rumor. With them, it becomes trackable. Someone asks you to confirm your birth date, and you do. Slowly. There is no easy backspace here. Mistakes mean crossing out, rewriting, and leaving little scars of correction. Those scars matter because they show honesty. Public health runs on trust, and trust runs on records that can be checked. A nurse stamps your card, and the stamp makes a dull, satisfying thud. It is a small sound, but it changes your future calendar. You will be reminded. You will be expected back if the schedule requires it. This is what a vaccine campaign really is. A long conversation between people and time. A date on paper is a promise to your future self. It says, you did the first part, now finish the series. In many vaccine schedules, multiple doses build stronger immunity. The first dose introduces the idea. The next dose reinforces it. Later doses can sharpen the response, like focusing a lens. And if you skip those, protection may be thinner than you think. Not useless, just less reliable. And reliability is the whole point. The staff here understands something that looks boring and is actually profound. A town is not protected by average behavior. It is protected by consistent behavior. So they keep the paperwork simple. They keep the lines moving. They keep instructions plain. They do not say herd immunity as a phrase. They do not need to. They say, bring this card back. They say, keep it somewhere safe. They say, tell your neighbor there is still time today. You see a stack of completed forms clipped together with a metal clip. The clip bites down like it is serious about its job. Those pages will go somewhere after the clinic, maybe to a county health office, maybe into a filing cabinet that smells like dust and ink, maybe into a box that will someday be forgotten in a basement. But for now, It is a map of protection. It shows who has been reached and who still needs a knock on the door. In the 1950s, this kind of record keeping is both fragile and powerful. It is fragile because paper burns, gets wet, gets lost. It is powerful because it turns a crowd into a plan. You notice how the workers talk to each other. Short sentences, names repeated back to avoid errors. It sounds almost like air traffic control, except with less glamour. They are doing redundancy, the quiet safety trick. When human attention is limited, repetition becomes armor. A volunteer reads a name out loud, and another person points to the matching line. Yes, that is you. Yes, that is the right dose. Yes, that is today's date. And you realize this clinic is not just medicine. It is logistics. It is community theater where everyone pretends it is a normal errand. A mother asks what to do if her child gets a fever later. The nurse answers with calm honesty. A little soreness is common. A mild fever can happen. Call your doctor if it is high or persistent, and do not panic. Reassurance is part of the product, not fake reassurance, not sugarcoating, just context. Your body is reacting because it is learning. Learning sometimes makes noise. Somewhere behind the tables, you see a box of extra pens. You see rubber bands. You see paper clips, the humble tools of a campaign that spans months. It is almost funny, in a tired way. Humanity fights viruses with stationery. Congratulations, you are alive in an era where a stamp pad can be a weapon. As the line continues, the forms keep stacking, and so does the trust. Trust is not a feeling here. It is a system of small verifications. It is the nurse washing her hands again. It is the lot number written clearly. It is the cooler temperature checked twice. It is the sharps container not overfilled. Every one of those details is a tiny, boring act of respect for the people in line. And once your name has been pinned to a date and a dose, the clinic turns your attention to the next quiet step. Not the vaccine itself, but what happens after. The waiting chair, the soft check-in, the simple pause to prove you are fine. You are guided toward a section of folding chairs. They face no stage because there is nothing to watch. This is the anticlimax on purpose. The chair creaks when you sit, like it is relieved to have a job. The room sounds different here. Less paperwork, more small talk, a throat clearing, a child whispering, a distant door hinge complaining softly. You sit with your bandage and your card, and you wait. Not because anyone expects you to collapse, because care is patient, and patience catches rare problems early. Some people faint after injections, not from the vaccine usually, from the moment, from the needle, from holding their breath without noticing. The body has old reflexes, and sometimes it yanks the lights down for a second. If that happens, the staff treats it like weather. They bring water. They tilt the head forward. They speak in low, practical tones. No shame, no alarm, just sit a moment longer. You watch a nurse make a slow circuit of the chairs. She looks for pale faces, glassy eyes, someone sweating through a brave smile. She asks, "How are you feeling?" Most people say, "Fine." Some say, "A little dizzy." And the nurse nods like she expected that, because she did. She has seen hundreds of nervous systems try to be stoic. This is science as hospitality. Make safety feel normal. Make the clinic feel like a library, not a battlefield. You notice how the waiting area has its own small rules. People speak softer than they have to. They keep children close. They do not linger too long because others need seats. Even boredom here is cooperative. In the background, you can still hear the vaccination station, the tear of a wrapper, a quiet instruction, a pencil scratch. It is a rhythm, like knitting needles, clicking, like a metronome. Your immune system, meanwhile, is already moving deeper into its lesson. Cells are traveling. Signals are being exchanged. Antibodies will rise over days, not minutes. Your body is doing slow work, the kind that never looks heroic. You might think protection should feel dramatic. Wrong again. Protection is often a lack of drama later. A summer with fewer whispers. A school year without crutches that arrived too suddenly. A pool reopening without that tight parental smile. A man in the waiting chairs rubs his arm and makes a joke about being magnetized. It is an because humans cope with needles using humor. The nurse does not laugh much, but she smiles politely. She has heard every joke, and she will hear them again next hour. A child swings their legs, bored now that the scary part is over. That boredom is a good sign. Bored children are living children with enough safety to be annoyed. The clinic is successful when the waiting chair feels pointless. You sit a few minutes longer until the nurse gives a small nod. All right, you can go. And as you stand, you feel that strange lightness, not from dizziness, but from finishing something. A task completed, a fear reduced to a bandage. You walk toward the exit, past the signs that made everything simple. And while you move, your mind does what minds do. In quiet moments, it wanders backward, toward the reason this building is full in the first place, toward the shadow that polio cast over towns like this. Because the clinic is calm, but the memory that built it is not. You step out of line and into thought, and the thought is a summer day that suddenly feels suspicious. Polio had a cruel personality. It liked to arrive when children were outside, not because it loved sunshine, but because humans gathered in it. Swimming pools, picnics, movie theaters with sticky floors. Virus prefers what people prefer: close contact and shared surfaces. In many outbreaks, parents began to treat summer like a threat. They watched their children play and felt a second soundtrack underneath. What if? What if? Polio spreads mainly through the fecal-oral route, which is a clean phrase for a filthy reality. Microscopic traces, invisible, transferred from hands to mouths. It can also spread through respiratory secretions, especially early in infection. And because many infections are mild, it can travel quietly. A child with a sore throat, a child who seems fine by Tuesday. Then, for a small unlucky fraction, the virus crosses into the nervous system. It targets motor neurons, the cells that tell muscles to move. When those neurons are damaged, muscles weaken or become paralyzed. The paralysis is often asymmetric, one limb more than another, like the body is being edited badly. And if the neurons controlling breathing are hit, the situation becomes mechanical. This is where the iron lung enters the story. A machine that looks like a metal coffin with a head sticking out. It uses negative pressure, changing pressure around the chest to force breathing. In human terms, it breathes for you by pulling your ribs outward. It is loud, rhythmic, and relentless. A child inside one can survive, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months, some for years. The machine becomes a room you live in, a strange steel womb that keeps you alive. Hospitals during polio outbreaks filled with these devices, rows of them pumping in unison like a factory that makes air. If you have never heard that sound, imagine a heavy bellows over and over. Imagine trying to sleep next to it. Now imagine being the one who cannot stop it. This was the specter behind the clinic's calm. Not an abstract statistic, but a memory of metal and breath. Families feared not only death, but the long aftermath. Paralysis that changed a life's geometry. Leg braces, crutches, physical therapy that turned childhood into work. There was also something later recognized: post-polio syndrome. Decades after recovery, some survivors experienced new weakness and fatigue. Nerves that had compensated for earlier damage wore out under the long strain. Even after the outbreak passed, the virus left echoes. So, a town learned to adapt. They closed pools. They canceled gatherings. They scrubbed surfaces with a kind of desperate faith in soap. They told children not to share drinks, not to put fingers in mouths, which is like telling the tide not to be wet. Still, people tried, because trying is what humans do when faced with an invisible predator. The worst part was uncertainty. Not everyone infected became visibly ill. Not everyone ill became paralyzed. No, one could look at a child and know the outcome. So fear spread alongside the virus, and fear is always faster. Then the vaccine arrives, and the fear meets something solid. A vial, a schedule, a plan, a clinic with arrows on the wall. It is not an instant victory. It is a long decline in cases, a slow return of trust in ordinary life. But that slow decline is what makes the clinic feel so determined. This is not a celebration. It is a repair job. You remember the people in line, their polite jokes, their careful calm, their children held close. They are not here for adventure. They are here because they are tired of living with the question mark. And once you understand the shadow polio cast, the vaccine feels less like a medical object and more like a shared community project, one that spreads far beyond one building. Because immunity is not only inside you, it is between you. It is in the space where transmission fails to find a path. One vaccinated person is a locked door. Many vaccinated people are a hallway of locked doors. The virus can still knock, but it cannot find enough rooms to rent. This is the idea people will later call herd immunity, a phrase that sounds pastoral, like sheep on a hill. In reality, it is crowd math and bad luck for a virus. When enough people are immune, chains of transmission break, outbreaks sputter. The virus wastes its chance because it runs out of susceptible bodies. That means even the unvaccinated can be protected, indirectly. Newborns too young for certain shots, people with immune problems who cannot respond well, those who missed a clinic day because life happened. Community immunity is a collective blanket, and like any blanket, it has holes, if you stop weaving. In the 1950s, the weaving is physical. Church basements, volunteer lists, Rotary clubs, and women's groups organizing rides. Someone calling neighbors on a phone line that crackles. Someone bringing ice because cold is precious. Someone making coffee for the staff because tired hands shake. You begin to see the invisible network, not just scientists in distant laboratories, but clerks and drivers and nurses, teachers who send notes home, local radio announcing clinic hours, a town agreeing quietly to participate in something bigger than itself. There is a kind of pride in that, not loud pride, practical pride, the pride of showing up on time, the pride of doing a small thing that adds up. You can almost feel the statistical curve changing, though nobody says curve out loud. Fewer cases means fewer hospital beds filled, fewer iron lungs humming, fewer whispered conversations when a child limps, fewer summers that feel cursed. It does not happen overnight. It happens like dawn, slowly enough that you doubt it, until suddenly you can see. Of course, nothing in biology is absolute. Vaccines reduce risk. They do not create immortality. Coverage matters, timing matters, storage matters. And viruses, when given enough opportunity, will keep trying. So the community project is never truly finished. It is maintained, like roads, like water systems, like trust. And that is why the clinic is so meticulous about its records and its cold boxes. And because it is meticulous, it has to be a little obsessed with time. Not cosmic time, not the heat-death kind, just the petty human time of minutes, hours, and shift changes. You watch a nurse glance at a wall clock, then back at the cooler. The clock does not care about polio. The clock only cares about turning. But the vaccine does care about turning in its own fragile way. It cares about how long it sits out, uncapped, warming by degrees you cannot feel. So every motion stays tight and small, like a practiced dance in a narrow kitchen. Vial out, dose drawn, vial back into cold, needle capped, needle used, needle gone. Nothing is wasted, because waste is a luxury you cannot afford in a campaign. You start to notice how the whole room behaves like a living organism. The registration table is the mouth, taking in names and information. The vaccination station is the stomach, doing the real work. The waiting chairs are the intestines, slow and observant, making sure nothing goes wrong. And the filing box is the memory, storing what happened so it can happen again. A town, briefly, becomes a body that wants to protect itself. That collective body has weaknesses too. It gets tired. It gets distracted. It has opinions some people in line trust immediately, because the nurse is familiar. Some trust only because their neighbor did it first, and some trust nobody, but show up anyway, because fear of polio is heavier. Public health rarely gets a perfect audience. It gets whoever life delivers through the door. In the 1950s, you can feel the culture of the time pressed into every gesture. There is respect for uniforms, for doctors, for the idea of expertise. There is also rumor, suspicion, and the quiet hum of politics. Even here, science does not float above society. Science is dragged around by society like luggage with a broken wheel. Still, the clinic moves people through, one arm, then the next, and in the background, the staff is quietly thinking about a problem that never gets a poster. How to do this safely, at scale, with ordinary human hands. Because the polio vaccine story includes a shadow that is not the disease itself. It includes manufacturing, quality control, and one very human catastrophe. You do not hear the words at the registration table, but in the minds of the professionals, they are present like a cold draft. Cutter. A single word that can still tighten throats in public health. In the early days, after the Salk vaccine was introduced, one manufacturer released vaccine with live poliovirus in it, not on purpose, not with malice. With process failure? With assumptions? With a chain of small errors that lined up perfectly? The result was real infections, paralysis, and deaths in children who came for protection. Congratulations, you have discovered that safety is not a feeling. Safety is a system, and systems can fail quietly until they fail loudly. That event forced the world to take vaccine production as seriously as surgery. It pushed regulations, standardized testing, and oversight that did not rely on anyone being a hero. It taught a brutal lesson that inactivated has to mean inactivated. Not mostly, not probably, not close enough. It has to be dead in the exact way biology defines dead. So when you see the nurse check a lot number twice, it is not fussiness. It is history speaking through her fingers. It is a memory of how consequences can move faster than apologies. And that is why the clinic loves checklists. Because a checklist is boring, and boring is what you want. Boring means repeatable. Boring means less room for improvisation. Improvisation is for jazz, not for injecting the entire town. The strange comfort is that this kind of caution works. Over time, vaccine campaigns did not just reduce polio cases. They reduced the chaos of uncertainty around the vaccine itself. They turned it into routine medicine, like getting a stitch or setting a bone. And once something becomes routine, it becomes easier to distribute. A community can accept a routine. A community will build routines into its calendar, the way it builds in harvest and holidays. You can feel that calendar beginning to form. Even in this one night, someone at the table tells a parent, "Come back in a few weeks." The parent nods, already translating that into chores and rides and school schedules. Health, in practice, is always nested inside life. Then your attention drifts again because your brain loves a quieter corner. It drifts to the small station where used needles disappear. You watch the container, thick and unforgiving, swallow sharp metal without complaint. There is an odd mercy in a container that does not argue with reality. Sharps are dangerous, so they go into a hard box. Full box gets sealed. Sealed box gets handled like it is still biting. This is another unglamorous part of clinic life: waste management. It is the kind of science nobody puts on a poster, but it is how you avoid turning prevention into a new problem. In the 1950s, disposable plastic syringes are not yet everywhere. Many places still rely on reusable equipment, sterilized between uses. So you might see metal trays moving toward a back room. You might smell steam, that damp, hot scent, like a laundry day for machines. An autoclave is essentially controlled violence against microbes. High-pressure steam at temperatures that make proteins unravel and surrender. Microbes do not have opinions about your intentions. They only have survival strategies, and heat is one of the few arguments they respect. Some bacteria can form spores, little armored capsules of stubbornness, so the time and temperature have to be right, not just warm and hopeful. You learn quickly that clean and sterile are not the same thing. Clean is what your kitchen looks like after you wipe the counter. Sterile is what happens after you have tried to erase life itself from a surface. The clinic aims for as close to sterile as it can, given the era and equipment. And it does it with repetition, not drama. You can almost hear the mental refrain in every worker. Do the same thing, the same way, every time. Because the one time you get creative is the time you regret it. That thought follows you as you watch more people cycle through the waiting chairs. The room is full of minor human reactions. A teenager trying to look indifferent, eyes fixed on a wall. A grandparent talking softly about how they remember earlier outbreaks. A toddler who cries late, not from pain, but from the insult of being restrained. The clinic meets them all with the same steady rhythm. Not cold, not overly sentimental, just steady, like a train schedule that keeps its promise. And as the line thins, you begin to notice the social geometry of it all. Some people arrived in groups, neighbors who walked together. Some arrived alone, shoulders tight, as if the act of showing up is private. In a small town, privacy is rare. So the clinic offers a kind of acceptable privacy, the privacy of being one of many. You are not singled out. You are part of a crowd doing a reasonable thing. That is a powerful kind of comfort. It is also a powerful kind of persuasion, because when health becomes normal behavior, it stops needing speeches. It becomes what people do, like voting or mowing lawns. And that is how a whole community makes immunity together, by making it boring enough to repeat. You notice the way information travels in the room, not as a lecture, but as a soft echo. A nurse tells one parent, "Keep the bandage on for a bit." That parent tells another parent while standing up. A volunteer says, "Keep your card somewhere safe." A man repeats it to his wife, as if it was his idea. This is how instructions spread. In small human relays, the clinic is not just dispensing vaccine. It is dispensing habits. Habits are the real long-term technology. A vaccine dose matters, but a habit of coming back matters more. A habit of not dismissing public health announcements matters more. A habit of trusting boring systems when they have earned it matters more. You can feel the infrastructure of cooperation forming. There are paper signs, yes, but there are also social signs. A neighbor holds a door. Someone gives up a chair. A mother shares a pen without thinking. All of it is small, but small is how mass campaigns actually happen. You hear someone mention the school will host another clinic next week? Of course it will. Schools are buildings designed for organized crowds. They have hallways, gymnasiums, and adults who already know how to manage lines. A school is a logistical dream disguised as a place for arithmetic. Churches play their part too, because churches are also buildings for crowds. They also come with trust, a social glue that can hold plans together. Local groups, volunteer clubs, and town councils become part of the immune system. Not metaphorically, in a cute way. Functionally, they identify the vulnerable, they move resources, they coordinate timing. That is what immune systems do. They are not just fighters, they are organizers. Even the local newspaper becomes part of it. It prints clinic dates and locations in small columns near the weather. This is science in its natural habitat, squeezed between advertisements and sports scores. Radio stations announce reminders too, their voices traveling into kitchens. A voice says, "Polio vaccinations today," and a mother looks at the clock. A father checks the car. A child complains and gets dressed anyway. This is how immunity spreads, not through epiphanies, but through errands. And in the background of all those errands is a simple statistical truth. A virus needs access. It needs susceptible bodies close enough together, often enough, to keep its chain unbroken. Vaccination removes links from the chain, not all at once, enough to make the chain unreliable. An outbreak is like a campfire, hungry for dry wood. Vaccination is rain, not dramatic, just persistent, making ignition harder. Eventually, the fire cannot find fuel, and it dies out. The town does not celebrate the mathematics. The town celebrates the absence. No child in an iron lung this year. No closures. No sick room whispers. Just ordinary complaints about schoolwork and weather. Ordinary becomes a victory condition. In the polio years, that was a profound thing to want. And it is why so many people showed up even when they disliked needles. It was not because they loved science. It was because they loved normal life. Science, at its best, is the restoration of normal. At its worst, it is the reminder that normal was always temporary. But tonight, in this clinic, the goal is simple. Reduce the odds of tragedy. Make the future a little less sharp. You see it in the way the staff watch the last of the line. They look tired, but not discouraged. They look like people who have done something useful, which is its own kind of rest. They begin to clean, even while a few people still wait in chairs. Surfaces are wiped, trays are cleared, cotton jars are capped. The building slowly shifts from service to shutdown, like a diner after lunch rush, and your mind, being what it is, starts noticing the other quiet sciences hidden in this era, the ones that make a polio clinic possible in the first place, the ones that keep life running even when nobody calls it science, because the vaccine is only one layer of the town's defense. And if you zoom out, you see a whole lattice of boring interventions holding the world together. Soap is one of them. A bar of soap sits in a dish at home, softened at the edges, slightly cracked. It looks like nothing, until you remember what it does. Soap molecules have a split personality. One end likes water, the other end likes oils and grease. In human terms, soap is a social mediator between things that hate each other. It grabs onto oily grime, and it also grabs onto water, and it convinces them to leave together. When you wash your hands, you are not just rinsing. You are dissolving, prying, lifting, and carrying away. And when it comes to many viruses, that matters even more. Poliovirus itself is a tough little capsule, a non-enveloped virus, not easily ruined by soap the way some enveloped viruses are. But soap still helps by removing contaminated material from skin. It is not magic. It is transport. It turns your hands into something less sticky, less hospitable. Hand washing is a ritual of friction and time. Warm water, lather, rub between fingers, under nails, rinse, dry. boring, effective, and it only works when people do it, which is always the hardest step. In the 1950s, public health messaging leans hard on hygiene, not because it is new, but because it is cheap and broadly useful. Clean hands reduce many infections, especially those that travel through mouths, gastrointestinal illnesses, some respiratory illnesses, the endless parade of childhood bugs. Soap does not care which germ is fashionable this year. It just does its molecular job, and it fits beautifully into the domestic world because it is already there. A mother does not need a laboratory to use soap. She needs a sink, water, and the patience to insist, which is why plumbing matters as much as medicine. Clean water is another hidden helper, so obvious you stop seeing it. You turn a faucet and water arrives like a tame miracle. But that miracle depends on pipes, pumps, and treatment plants that work through the night. In many places, before widespread sanitation, water carried disease like a routine delivery. Cholera, typhoid, dysentery, and other infections that thrive where waste meets drinking water. Polio is also tied to sanitation in a strange historical way. In the early 20th century, as sanitation improved in some regions, children encountered poliovirus later in life. When exposure happens very early, infants may have partial protection from maternal antibodies. When exposure shifts to older ages, the pattern of outbreaks can change. The relationship is complicated and not a moral fable, but it is a reminder that the environment shapes disease, not just the pathogen. Clean water reduces many risks, but it does not erase biology. It changes the battlefield. Water treatment uses chemistry that feels almost gentle until you remember its purpose. Chlorination is controlled poisoning of microbes. A small amount of chlorine, enough to disrupt cellular machinery, enough to make pathogens fail, not enough, ideally, to harm you at the concentrations used. Filtration removes particles that shelter microbes. Sedimentation lets heavier stuff settle out, because gravity is free labor. This is not glamorous work. It is municipal work. A person in a hard hat checking gauges at a plant at midnight. A pump humming steadily, indifferent to human stories. And in the end, fewer children get sick and nobody throws a parade for the pipe. Congratulations, you have discovered that civilization is mostly pipes. Alongside water comes basic sanitation, the unromantic management of waste, sewers, septic systems, latrines, and the rules about where waste can go. Polio spreads through fecal contamination, which makes sanitation a direct intervention. Every flush, every covered sewer line, every properly maintained septic tank is part of disease control. Not heroic, not cinematic, just effective. If you want to frighten yourself gently, consider the alternative. Consider a town where waste runs into open ditches, where water sources are shared with animals, where hand washing is rare because water is precious. In that world, disease is not an event, it is a season that never ends. So when you see a tidy clinic, you are also seeing the benefits of infrastructure. A building with clean floors implies clean water. Clean water implies pipes. Pipes imply a tax base and maintenance. Maintenance implies trust, again, and the willingness to pay for things you cannot show off. Public health is a chain of boring agreements. Another quiet helper sits in kitchens, humming softly, making its own cold chain. Refrigeration. A refrigerator in the 1950s is heavy, white, and proud of itself. It has rounded corners and a handle that closes with a thick, satisfying seal. Inside, cold air pools like a calm fog. Refrigeration slows microbial growth by making life inconvenient. Bacteria and molds often grow more slowly at low temperatures because enzymes move sluggishly in the cold. Not dead, just inconvenienced. So leftovers last longer. Milk stays drinkable. Meat waits a little more patiently. Foodborne illness becomes less frequent, not because people became wiser, but because cold became accessible. Cold is a public health tool you can keep in your kitchen. And before modern safety standards, it mattered deeply. Because milk is not just milk. Milk is a nutrient-rich fluid that microbes adore. Which is why pasteurization joins refrigeration as a quiet hero. Pasteurization is heat used with precision. Warm the milk to a certain temperature, hold it for a certain time, then cool it down. The goal is not to burn it. The goal is to reduce pathogens enough to make the risk acceptable. It is named after Louis Pasteur, who had the audacity to say that invisible life mattered. He was correct, which is often the most annoying kind of person. Pasteurization reduced diseases like tuberculosis and brucellosis that could travel through milk. It turned a daily food into a safer habit. Again, boring. Again, effective. And you can feel how all of these helpers overlap. Soap reduces contamination. Clean water reduces exposure. Sanitation reduces spread. Refrigeration and pasteurization reduce food-related risk. Vaccination reduces susceptibility. None of them is perfect alone. Together, they make a town harder to harm. You begin to see why public health is described as layered protection. Not a single wall, but many fences. A virus can climb one fence. It struggles when there are 5. Then there is another set of quiet tools, sitting in drawers and cabinets. Bandages, antiseptics, first aid kits with their tidy little compartments. A roll of gauze that feels soft but firm, like fabric with purpose. A bottle of iodine, brown and staining, that smells like a swimming pool's serious cousin. Antiseptics are chemical discouragement. They do not always kill everything. They reduce microbial load, the number of organisms present, and that often is enough to prevent infection from taking hold in a cut. Your skin is a barrier, a living wall. When it breaks, the outside world gets ideas. So you answer with chemistry. You dab antiseptic on the break in your skin, and you let it sting a little. That sting is your nervous system reading the warning label on reality. Iodine works by reacting with proteins and other molecules microbes need to function. In human terms, it scrambles the tiny machines bacteria rely on. Alcohol does something similar, unfolding proteins and messing up membranes. Hydrogen peroxide fizzes, not because it is magical, but because it is reactive. It breaks down into water and oxygen, and the bubbling helps lift debris. None of it is perfect, and none of it is polite, but it can shift the odds, which is what public health always does. You clean the wound, you cover it, and you give your skin time to rebuild the wall. Bandages are small architecture. They keep moisture in, keep dirt out, and keep your own hands from poking at it. And yes, your hands will poke at it because humans cannot resist. A sterile dressing in a clinic is a controlled environment in miniature. It is a tiny room where bacteria are not invited. If you are unlucky, bacteria arrive anyway. Staphylococcus aureus, Staphylococcus, or E. us, is a common resident on skin. It is usually harmless until it finds a doorway. Then it can become an abscess, a pocket of pus, which is your immune system building a prison. Pus is not gross by accident. It is a soup of dead cells, bacteria, and immune debris. Your body is not aiming for beauty. It is aiming for containment. This is what first aid does in the background of a vaccine era. It keeps small injuries from becoming big infections. It keeps work accidents from turning into fevers. It keeps children playing outside without the outside moving in permanently. In the mid-century, these small routines stack up. Not just clinics, but kitchens and bathrooms and school nurses. The more you look, the more you see boring science holding everything together. Even something as dull as laundry becomes a health intervention. Hot water, soap, agitation, and drying time. You are not just cleaning shirts. You are lowering microbial load on cloth that touches mouths and hands. And when a family does not have hot water or enough soap, the whole system changes. That is the ugly truth of public health. It depends on resources that feel invisible until they are missing. Speaking of invisible, you can feel another helper hovering in the air of the clinic. Ventilation, not a dramatic gust, just air that keeps moving. A window cracked open, a fan turning, a room that does not let breath pile up. Air carries droplets, and droplets carry problems. You do not need to know the names of the microbes to understand the principle. Stagnant air is an invitation. Moving air is a gentle refusal. So the clinic smells like floor wax and alcohol, and also like fresh air trying its best. And all of this quiet infrastructure, the plumbing, the soap, the refrigeration, the bandages, is why the clinic can focus on one job, put immunity into arms, without putting trouble in with it. But the world of mid-century health has more quiet helpers than that. Some are sitting in medicine cabinets, disguised as tiny white pills. Antibiotics are the obvious ones, the loud miracle that became ordinary too fast. Penicillin and its relatives changed what infections could do to a person. A cut that might have turned into sepsis now often becomes a manageable event. But antibiotics also come with their own dark joke. Use them carelessly, and bacteria learn. Not consciously, not maliciously, just by selection. The sensitive ones die, the resistant ones survive, and the world becomes harder again. Evolution is always awake, tapping its foot, waiting for you to get lazy. In the 1950s, antibiotic resistance is already a known concept, but not yet a full cultural fear. People are still in the honeymoon phase. They still believe medicine is a straight line toward better. Congratulations, you are living in the brief era where a miracle feels permanent. Meanwhile, another quiet mid-century helper sits in schools. The school nurse, a person with a cabinet of supplies, a thermometer, and the authority to send you home. That authority matters more than it sounds. Keeping sick kids out of crowded classrooms breaks chains of transmission. Not perfectly, but enough to matter. Schools are beautiful disease machines. They are dense networks of touch, shared pencils, shared air, shared everything. So, basic school policies become health policies. Wash hands before lunch, cover coughs, stay home with fever. Even if nobody calls it epidemiology, it is. Epidemiology is just the math of who touches whom and when. Now, you drift back to the clinic again, because the clinic is where all these background helpers converge. You imagine the staff near the end of the day. Their voices are softer now, lower with fatigue. They are still careful because fatigue makes mistakes seductive. A nurse counts remaining vials, and her finger moves down a list. She does not trust her brain alone. She trusts ink. She trusts check marks. She trusts that a system can carry a tired person. That is the real design goal. Not perfection, but resilience. In the back, someone is dealing with the unromantic aftermath of the day. Used cotton, wrappers, and paper scraps. A trash bag tied off, not casually, but with a knot that means business. Anything with blood or needles gets separated, handled like it still has teeth. Biohazard is a modern word, but the idea is old. If something can hurt you, you do not toss it where a child can find it. You might see metal instruments placed into a tray for cleaning. If they are reusable, they need a full cycle. First, gross debris removed, because sterilization is not a magic erase button. Then washing, then rinsing, then drying, then autoclaving. Steam under pressure at temperatures that microorganisms cannot tolerate. The autoclave is a quiet tyrant. It does not negotiate. It denatures proteins, disrupts membranes, and collapses the structures life depends on. The staff may not describe it that way. They just say, run the load. But every load is a small battle won, so tomorrow can be boring too. And boring is the goal. Because a campaign like this is not one day. It is weeks, months, sometimes years of repeat visits and reminders. A town does not become immune in a single afternoon. It becomes immune the way a library becomes organized. One book returned, one shelf fixed, one label at a time. Speaking of labels, you notice again how much of this story is ink. Lot numbers, expiration dates, manufacturer codes, dose schedules. A vial without a label is not medicine. It is a mystery liquid, and mysteries do not belong in muscles. In the 1950s, printing and packaging are part of medical safety. The label tells you which vaccine, which strain, which run. It makes problems traceable, which makes accountability possible. Traceability is a cold comfort, but it is still comfort. If something goes wrong, you can find the thread and pull. If something goes right, you can repeat it. Repeatable success is what medicine actually wants. Your mind might drift to what the polio vaccine was like at the manufacturing level. Not the lab bench romance, but the industrial reality. Large tanks, controlled condition steps. Formalin, a form of formaldehyde, was used to inactivate the virus for the Salk vaccine. Inactivation is not just killing. It is killing without destroying the structures the immune system must recognize. Too gentle, and live virus remains. Too harsh, and the immune lesson gets blurred. So manufacturers had to walk a narrow path. Quality control testing was the guardrail. And in the early years, the guardrail was still being built. That is why the Cutter incident mattered so much. It was not only a tragedy, it was a system revealing its weak points. Afterward, testing became more standardized and more stringent. More samples, more checks, more waiting before release. And the public rarely sees that. They see the needle, not the factory. They see the clinic, not the regulations. But the clinic exists downstream of all of it. You can almost feel the invisible paperwork stretching back in time. From this card in your hand, to a county ledger, to a state report, to federal oversight, to a manufacturing log, a chain of documentation, like a spine. And if any vertebra slips, the whole thing hurts. That is why people in public health love boring rules. Rules are the scaffolding that keeps tired humans from improvising disaster. Now, let your attention wander outward again, into the more part of the night. The hidden helpers of mid-century health are not only tools, they are also measurement. Thermometers, for example, are tiny instruments of truth. A fever is a sensation, but it is also a number, and numbers change decisions. A mercury thermometer in the 1950s is a glass stick with a silver thread. It looks delicate because it is, and it works because mercury expands predictably with heat. Predictability is the heart of measurement. When you put that thermometer under your tongue, you are turning your body into a data source. Not glamorous, but powerful. With temperature, a nurse can distinguish fatigue from infection. Sometimes, not perfectly, but better than guessing. Blood pressure cuffs do a similar thing. They translate the push of blood into a gauge reading, a squeezing cuff, a stethoscope, and a human ear listening for Korotkov sounds. Kor-ot-koff. Those sounds mark blood flow returning as pressure is released. It is a ritual that looks simple, and is, but it replaces vague worry with information. Information is calming, not because it is always good, because it is clear. Clear is easier to handle than unknown. You can plan around clear. Polio was feared partly because it was unclear. Who gets the mild sore throat? Who gets paralysis? Who gets an iron lung? So the vaccine campaign is, in its own way, a rebellion against uncertainty. It is a town saying, "We will not leave this to chance alone." Now, consider another mid-century helper, nutrition. Not in a fancy wellness sense, but in the basic sense of calories, protein, and vitamins. A child with adequate nutrition has an immune system that can build and repair more reliably. Malnutrition is not only hunger, it is compromised barriers, slower healing, weaker responses. In the 1950s, vitamin fortification becomes a quiet public health strategy. Iodized salt helps prevent goiter and enlarged thyroid from iodine deficiency. Vitamin D in milk helps prevent rickets, soft bones that bend under body weight. These interventions are not dramatic. They are bureaucratic. They are food policy as medicine. And they work best when nobody thinks about them. The most successful public health intervention is the one that becomes invisible. That is both its triumph and its curse. Because once people stop seeing the threat, they stop valuing the fence. But the fence is still doing its job. Speaking of fences, you can think about how the clinic itself is a kind of fence in time. It is one day, one evening, a pop-up barrier against a virus that would otherwise roam freely. And, like any fence, it must be maintained. The staff must keep coming. The town must keep showing up. And in the background, someone must keep paying for needles, ice, fuel, and paper. Public health is not only science, it is budgeting with consequences. Now, you ease back toward the clinic's waiting area again, because this is where the human part sits quietly. You are in one of those folding chairs, watching other people watch the clock. A child's attention has already drifted to the floor pattern in the linoleum. An adult's attention has drifted to their own arm, rubbing the bandage edge. The room smells a little more like sweat now because the day has been long. But it still smells clean because cleaning is part of the ritual. A volunteer walks by with a small tray of paper cups. Water. Not exciting. But in a clinic, water is an intervention. It treats faintness. It calms nerves. It gives you something to do with your mouth besides worry. Someone, somewhere, has decided to provide it. That is science as hospitality again. Not equations, just care expressed as logistics. A person who looks pale is guided to a chair near a wall, feet on the floor, head lowered a little. A calm voice saying, "You are okay. This happens sometimes." The biology of fainting is old and embarrassing. Vasovagal syncope, vasovagal syncope. Your vagus nerve gets over-enthusiastic, your heart rate drops, blood vessels dilate, and your brain briefly complains about supply. Down you go, or almost. It is not a moral failure. It is a wiring quirk, and the clinic is built to accommodate it without making a scene. Scenes are contagious. Calm is contagious too. So they treat it like weather and keep moving. Now, your mind drifts back to polio itself because the clinic never fully lets you forget the enemy. Polio virus is small, a simple capsid of protein around genetic material. No ambitions, no personality, just replication. It enters through the mouth, survives the stomach, and multiplies in the gut and throat. From there, it can spread through blood and in rare cases, reach the central nervous system. The exact route to the nervous system can vary, but the outcome is the same. Motor neurons get damaged, muscles lose their signal. The body becomes a puppet with cut strings, and the worst part is that the mind stays awake. Polio does not usually touch your consciousness. It steals movement while leaving awareness intact. That is why paralysis is such a special horror. You are present for the loss. So the vaccine is not only prevention, it is psychological relief. A town can breathe again without needing an iron lung to do it. You may wonder why people in that era were so focused on polio in particular, partly because it struck children, and societies cannot tolerate threats to children, partly because its severe form was so visually obvious. Crutches, braces, paralysis, iron lungs. A disease that makes itself visible becomes a symbol. And polio also arrived in waves. Outbreaks that felt like seasons. A quiet time, then a surge. Humans hate surges. Surges make you feel powerless. So a vaccine that could flatten that surge was not just medicine, it was control returned to human hands. Even if the control was partial, it felt like a handle to hold. Now, let us step gently back to the "and more" again, because the outline of the night is wide. There are other mid-century health routines that were quietly changing the world. One is prenatal care. A pregnant person visiting a clinic, getting blood pressure checked, urine tested for protein and sugar. Those tests look small, but they catch dangerous conditions. Pre-eclampsia, pre-eclampsia, can raise blood pressure and harm organs. Gestational diabetes can affect both parent and baby, so simple testing becomes a life-saving routine. Again, not dramatic, a cup, a strip, a note in a chart. Charts were thick then, paper stacked like sediment. But each line was a choice made earlier, to look for problems before they became emergencies. That same philosophy lives in the polio clinic. Do something early, while it is quiet, so you do not have to do something frantic later. This is the basic logic of prevention, and prevention always looks boring until it fails. Now, consider the rise of vaccines beyond polio in that era. Diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis. Vaccines were already part of childhood schedules. Diphtheria can coat the throat with a gray membrane that suffocates. Tetanus can lock muscles in painful rigidity, the jaw clamping so tightly you cannot eat. Pertussis, whooping cough, can make infants cough until they cannot breathe. These were not theoretical risks. They were present in living memory. So vaccine clinics were not one-time events only. They were part of a growing system of routine immunization. That routine had to be built, culturally and logistically. Parents had to learn schedules. Clinics had to store supplies. Public health departments had to track coverage. This is how modern health infrastructure formed, not in a single reform, but in repeated, tedious success. And success leaves behind paperwork, a mountain of cards, notes, and reports. You can picture a public health office at night, a desk lamp, a stack of files, a clerk's hand cramped from writing, numbers being added carefully, because a mistake could mean a neighborhood missed. This is what it looks like to fight a virus with administration. Now, bring your attention back to the room again, because the clinic is beginning to wind down. The line is shorter. The waiting chairs have gaps. A few people linger, not because they need to, but because they are talking. Community happens in the margins of errands. Someone mentions that the town pool might open again without fear. Someone else says, maybe this summer will feel normal. Normal, in this context, is not a boring word. It is the best possible future. The staff hears these comments without reacting much. They have learned a professional restraint. If you celebrate too early, biology will humble you, so they keep their joy quiet. Folded into competence, they wipe tables, they cap bottles, they check the cooler again, and then again, because the day is not over until everything is accounted for. In the back, unused vials must be stored properly. Return them to refrigeration, document the temperature, note how long they were out. Vaccines are like milk in that way. They are perishable, just with higher stakes. Some doses might be discarded if their handling is uncertain. That feels wasteful, and it is. But waste is sometimes the price of safety. If you cannot trust a dose, you do not use it. That is the grim bargain. Better to waste vaccine than to inject doubt into people. Trust is harder to manufacture than medicine. And in a small town, trust travels fast, both directions. One rumor can undo a month of work. so the staff protects trust with caution that looks almost fussy. Now, while the clinic closes, your mind keeps wandering through practical science. Because the story is not only polio, your thoughts drift to the plain brown bottles in the medicine cabinet. Because prevention is not only needles. You picture a bottle of aspirin, chalky tablets that smell faintly acidic and old. Acetyl salicylic acid is the formal name, which is science for pain relief with paperwork. It works by nudging down prostaglandins, the chemical messengers of pain and inflammation. In human terms, it tells your tissues to stop filing such dramatic complaints. In the 1950s, this kind of medicine is already ordinary, which is always the strange part. A century earlier, fever was a fate, not a symptom you managed with a pill. Now, in a small town, a headache is often just a headache, not a prophecy. That shift toward manageability is part of why people trust clinics, because clinics are places where suffering gets translated into tasks. Take the temperature, write the date, give the dose, watch for 15 minutes, and then there are the antibiotics, sitting there like a miracle that wants to be overused. Penicillin is not magic. It is a molecule that hates bacterial cell walls. Many bacteria build walls out of peptidoglycan, a mesh like a brick wall made of sugar and protein. Penicillin interferes with the enzymes that cross-link that wall. The bacteria keeps trying to grow, the wall fails, and the cell bursts. It is brutally simple. It is also selective, because your cells do not build that kind of wall. So you get a weapon that targets one kingdom of life more than another. But even in the 1950s, the bacteria are already taking notes. Some bacteria make beta-lactamase, an enzyme that cuts the penicillin ring like scissors. Some change their targets so the drug no longer fits. Some pump the drug back out, refusing the chemistry like a stubborn tenant. You do not need malice for resistance. You only need variation and survival, which nature provides for free. So a town that has just learned to love modern medicine is also sowing a future inconvenience, a quiet trade made without anyone signing a contract. Now your mind slips back to the clinic floor, where no one is talking about enzymes. They are talking about chairs and mop buckets, because the day is ending. A volunteer folds a sign, the kind that says, "Exit this way," and leans it against the wall. The sign looks tired, which is impressive for cardboard. Someone wipes down a table with a cloth that smells of mild disinfectant. That smell is not perfume. It is a warning to microbes. Disinfectants are not all the same, and the clinic knows it in their hands. Some are alcohol-based, fast-drying, good for quick wiping. Some are quaternary ammonium compounds, which is a long way to say chemicals that disrupt membranes. Some are bleach solutions, sodium hypochlorite, the loud argument that oxidizes whatever it touches. Bleach is effective, but it is rude. It fades fabric, stings noses, and makes metal resent you over time. So it gets used carefully, in the right place, at the right concentration. Because even cleaning has dosage. Too weak, and microbes survive. Too strong, and you poison the room you are trying to protect. That balancing act is most of public health, if you are honest. Now, you follow the staff as they begin counting, because closing time is a ceremony of numbers. A nurse checks the remaining vials, comparing them to the day's log. Every dose used should match a name on paper. If it does not match, you do not shrug. You look again, You check the trash. You check the cooler. Because missing doses are not just inventory problems. They are story problems. And stories become rumors. In a small town, rumors move faster than any virus ever did. So, the clinic closes the day the way it opened it, with verification. A volunteer counts the unused syringes, the cotton, the bandages, not because cotton is precious, but because running out changes behavior. Running out makes people improvise, and improvisation makes people sloppy. Sloppy is how the boring world becomes exciting, in the worst way. You watch the sharps container, now heavier, now closer to full. It will be sealed and handled as if it still contains a living bite, because it does, in a sense. Blood on a needle can carry hepatitis viruses, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C especially, and other pathogens. Polio is not the main worry from a used needle, but needles are not picky. The clinic treats every sharp as potentially contaminated because that assumption is protective. This is the principle of universal precautions, even before the phrase becomes widespread. Act as if the risk is real, so you do not have to gamble. Someone ties off a bag of trash, and the knot is firm and practical. The bag is carried with the arm held slightly away from the body. That is not drama, it is habit. To avoid brushing against clothes. Habits again, doing what they always do, saving people from their own forgetfulness. In the back room, metal trays sit waiting, like exhausted instruments. If equipment is reusable, it has to be cleaned before it is sterilized. That is a detail people forget, and it matters. Sterilization cannot reach through dried blood and protein crust. Dirt is armor. So the tray gets rinsed, scrubbed, and washed. And only then does it go to heat. Autoclaving is pressure and steam, usually around 250 degrees Fahrenheit, held for long enough to be convincing. The numbers matter, but the sensation matters more. It is hot enough to make plastic soften and to make microbes give up every structure they rely on. Afterward, instruments come out clean and blisteringly hot, the kind of heat that tells you not to touch. They cool in air, protected from dust, because sterile only stays sterile until the world lands on it. That is a dull truth, and an important one. Sterility is not a permanent state. It is a temporary achievement. Now, the clinic's refrigerator, or cooler storage, gets its final attention. Ice packs are replaced if they will store overnight in place. Temperatures are written down again, because if you did not write it, it did not happen. A vial that has been warmed too long may be discarded, even if it looks fine. That is the cruel part of biology. Appearance is not quality control. A protein can unfold without announcing itself. A vaccine can lose potency without changing color. So, you throw away the doubtful dose and you accept the waste. Because injecting false confidence is worse than wasting product. A tired nurse sits for a moment, just a moment, and rubs the bridge of her nose. You can tell she has been holding her focus like a heavy tray. Focus is physical. After enough hours, the clinic runs on attention, and attention is a limited resource. Now, while this room is becoming just a room again, your mind notices how the outside world will never see most of this. People will remember the pinch, the bandage, may be the taste of fear in their mouth. They will not remember the ledger checks, the temperature logs, the scrubbed trays, but those are the skeleton of the day, the quiet scaffolding that keeps public health upright. You think about how the town will carry the clinic home in small ways. A parent will put the vaccination card into a kitchen drawer. A child will show the bandage to a sibling like a trophy. Someone will mention the clinic at the grocery store near the bread, and that mention will carry a kind of calm. Not perfect calm, just enough to make the next person show up. That is how coverage grows, one ordinary conversation at a time. Now your attention drifts, again, toward the science that sits behind the town's new sense of control. Not the immune cells, you already watched them do their paperwork. Something broader, something that feels like weather. Epidemiology, the study of how disease moves through groups, not just bodies. It is not mystical, it is arithmetic with consequences. If one infected person infects more than one other person, on average, cases grow. If they infect fewer than one on average, the outbreak shrinks. That average is shaped by contact, hygiene, immunity, and timing. Vaccination pushes the average down by reducing the number of susceptible hosts. In a town, that means the virus bumps into walls more often. A cough lands on someone who does not become a factory. A contaminated hand touches a doorknob, but the next mouth does not lead to a chain. Transmission becomes a series of failed attempts. And when enough attempts fail, the virus disappears from local life. Not because it was defeated in single combat, because it ran out of opportunities. Like a salesman in a neighborhood that stopped answering doors. That is the quiet power the clinic is building. But the town will not say it that way. The town will say, there have not been cases lately. And that sentence will sound like relief. Now, there is a detail that sits under that relief, and it is worth touching gently. Polio is tricky because most infections do not look like polio. Many people have mild symptoms or none at all. So by the time paralysis appears, the virus has already been traveling. That means prevention has to be ahead of visible evidence. You vaccinate before you see the worst, because the worst is the late chapter. That is psychologically hard for humans, who prefer reacting to what they can see. The clinic, with its calm signage and familiar faces, is a way to make preemptive action feel normal. It turns foresight into a line you can stand in. Now, in the 1950s, there is also a second layer of polio reality: supportive care for those already affected. The long, grinding work of rehabilitation. You picture a physical therapy room that smells of sweat and antiseptic, parallel bars, braces, straps, and exercises repeated until boredom becomes strength. Polio survivors often had muscles that were partly denervated, partly intact. Therapy aimed to preserve function, prevent contractures, and teach new strategies. Contractures happen when muscles and tendons tighten from disuse, pulling joints into fixed positions. It is the body adapting to stillness in an unhelpful way. So therapy keeps joints moving, keeps tissues stretched, keeps the body from freezing into its damage. Braces orthoses are metal and leather solutions to neurological loss. They support weak limbs, align joints, and reduce the energy cost of walking. Walking with weak muscles can be exhausting because you recruit other muscles to compensate. your body becomes a committee doing an extra job. That compensation can work for years, even decades. And then, later, post-polio syndrome can appear. The old adaptations wearing thin. Motor units that expanded to compensate begin to fail under long use. Weakness returns, fatigue grows, and the past shows up again like a bill you thought was paid. The town and the clinic does not want that future, so it invests in prevention, because prevention is cheaper than decades of compensation. Not only cheaper in money, cheaper in pain. Now, let the scene slide back to the building as it empties. The last few waiting chairs are unoccupied now. Folding chairs look lonely when they are not holding people. A janitor, or maybe a volunteer in work clothes, begins stacking them. Metal legs scrape, a dry sound, like punctuation on the day. The floor shows scuff marks from so many shoes. The room's air changes as bodies leave, cooler, less humid, less alive. Even the fan sounds different, because it is no longer competing with conversation. The vaccination tables are stripped down to their bare surfaces. A jar that held cotton balls is capped and put away. A stamp pad is closed, ink protected from drying out. It is almost tender, the way supplies are put to bed. Because these objects will need to work again, and tomorrow will demand the same calm competence. Someone turns off a light in one corner, and the shadows grow longer. Not ominous, just evening doing its job. The clinic is becoming a quiet storage space again, a community room with a temporary purpose completed. But the day's impact does not stay in the building. It walks out on arms and in pockets, and it sits in lymph nodes learning names. That is the strange part. The most important work begins after everyone leaves. Now, your mind catches on one more practical science, one that was always present in these clinics. Communication, the careful art of telling people what to expect without spooking them. In the 1950s, instructions are often short and direct because space on paper is limited. But good instructions are also a kind of medicine. They reduce panic when a normal side effect appears, a sore arm, a mild fever, a little fatigue. These are signs of immune activation, not of the disease itself. But your nervous system does not care about that distinction at first. It just hears something changed and begins writing its own horror story. So, the clinic gives you a calmer script. If you feel unwell, rest. Drink water. Call if it is severe. This is not just kindness. It is risk management. Because frightened people tell frightened stories, and frightened stories spread faster than viruses. Now consider the difference between the injected inactivated vaccine and the oral, live, attenuated vaccine. The injected vaccine mainly drives systemic immunity, antibodies in the blood. The oral vaccine drives mucosal immunity in the gut, where the virus first lands. Mucosal immunity includes immunoglobulin A, a type of antibody that patrols surfaces like saliva and intestines. That can reduce viral replication and shedding, which helps stop spread. The injected vaccine protects the individual very well from paralysis, but may not stop gut infection as strongly. So in communities using the injected vaccine, the virus can sometimes still circulate quietly if introduced. In communities using the oral vaccine, transmission is often reduced more. But the oral vaccine has that rare risk, vaccine-associated paralytic polio. A weakened virus can, in very rare cases, regain neurovirulence through mutation. It is a tiny risk per dose, but a real one, especially in under-immunized populations. So public health choices shift over time. When wild polio is common, the benefit of stopping transmission may outweigh the rare vaccine risk. When wild polio becomes rare, the vaccine risk can become more prominent. That is why many places transitioned to injected, inactivated vaccines after controlling wild polio. It is a subtle victory condition. When you are arguing about rare vaccine risks, it often means the disease itself has been pushed into the shadows. The town in the clinic does not know how that story will unfold yet. They are living at a moment when polio still feels close enough to touch. So they do what humans do best when frightened and organized. They run a line, they fill a ledger, they keep ice cold. Now, you let the scene settle into the late evening and notice the staff as people again. A nurse rolls her shoulders and you hear the quiet crackle of joints. Hands are washed one more time, not for theater, for habit. Skin gets dry in winter, cracked from soap and repeated scrubbing. That dry skin is a small occupational cost, a tax paid in discomfort. A worker applies a bit of lotion, a simple barrier restored. Barrier protection is not only gloves and masks, it is also intact skin, the oldest protective layer you own. You watch a final check of the doors, a look back at the room. It is not sentimental, just a scan for anything forgotten, a pen left out, a form not filed, a vial misplaced. Small mistakes turn into tomorrow's confusion, so they catch them now, while the memory is still warm. Outside, the town air is cooler, carrying the smell of grass and distant cooking. Cars start, headlights sweep across the parking lot, and then drift away. A clinic day ends like any other event, with people going home to eat. That is the point of it all. To let life return to being about dinners and homework, not paralysis? Now, in your mind, you can follow one last thread of practical science that made these clinics possible. Manufacturing scale, the industrial ability to produce millions of doses. A vaccine is not just a formula, it is a production discipline. Cells are grown, virus is cultivated, inactivation is performed, purification happens, and testing repeats. Testing is the quiet tyrant of vaccine work. Sterility tests, potency tests, safety tests, lot release. Even the glass vials and rubber stoppers are controlled. Rubber can leach chemicals, glass can contain residues, and tiny contaminants matter. So suppliers become part of the health system, even if they never meet a patient. Then distribution, trucks and storage depots and refrigerated rooms. A failure at any step can undo the whole effort. That is why the clinic feels like it worships checklists, because it is the last link in a very long chain. And chains break at weak links, not at strong speeches. You can sense the humility in the staff's caution. They do not assume success. They verify it, dose by dose. Now, as the building empties, there is a small final ritual with the day's records. The ledger is closed, maybe wrapped in a cloth, and placed in a box. Forms are stacked, clipped, and labeled for transport. A clerk writes the date on the outside, because tomorrow will blur with today. Those papers will travel to a county office, then perhaps to a state report. They will become numbers in a larger picture, coverage rates, age groups reached, doses administered. This is how public health learns what it has done. Without measurement, You are just hoping loudly, and hope is not a strategy, no matter how sincere. Now the lights go down further, and the room becomes dim enough to feel private. The last staff member turns the key in the door, hearing the lock click. The click is small, but it carries weight. It says, "The clinic is closed, but the work is not over." Because inside hundreds of arms, immune systems are running their night shift. Antigen is being presented. Cells are dividing. Antibodies are being drafted and proofread. Memory is being filed in wet biological cabinets. And that quiet internal work is why, weeks from now, the town may feel different. Not euphoric, just calmer. Fewer cautions about pools, fewer rumors about fevers. More ordinary days, which is the only kind worth fighting for. But ordinary days still need maintenance. So the town will host another clinic, and another, because prevention is not a